Welcome to the Midlife Rider Project. This is a place for riders who have lived a little and learned a lot. A place for honest reflection, lived experience, and listening for the wisdom that emerges as we ride through this second season of life. In the last episode, we talked about how horse care has changed since the mid 1980s when I first began riding. Things like equine massage, chiropractic care, and saddle fitting have become a regular part of what we do for our horses. One of the other things that's increased in popularity during this time is animal communication. Now, I'll admit this one is near and dear to me. I have been doing intuitive communication with horses since the 90s, and I find this work so meaningful. What was once dismissed as fringe spirituality has become something thousands of horse owners are actively seeking out. And not for mystical reasons, but for very practical ones. If you've noticed the trend and wondered what it's actually about, or if you're thinking about trying it for yourself, this episode is for you. And if intuitive communication is something you've been curious about, stick around. We're going to get into what actually makes it different from the more common question based approach and why I think that's worth understanding. So, what really is animal communication? At its core, animal communication is telepathic conversation with animals. A practitioner tunes into a horse and receives information. This might be thoughts, feelings, perspectives, physical sensations, and then relays this information back to the owner. Often, what comes through shifts how the owner understands their horse entirely. It sounds unusual, and on the surface, it is. But thousands of horse owners have experienced sessions where a communicator revealed specific details about their horse's life or preferences or even physical sensations without being told anything in advance. That accuracy is usually what converts skeptics. Here is what's worth being upfront about, though. This is not scientifically validated. There are no peer-reviewed studies proving telepathic communication works. But I haven't found a scientific explanation for why it doesn't work either. And the anecdotal evidence is pretty overwhelming. For a lot of horse owners, the results speak louder than the absence of a study. There are two different approaches, question-based and intuitive. So since not all animal communication is the same, the difference is worth understanding, especially if you are thinking about booking a session. We'll begin with question-based communication. And this is the most common. The owner will have specific questions like, is my horse in pain? Why is he refusing jumps? What does she need from me? And then the communicator asks those questions telepathically and relays the answers back. It's direct, specific, and a lot of people find real value in it. Intuitive communication then takes a little different approach. Rather than asking predetermined questions, the communicator will tune into the horse and the relationship itself, reading that dynamic between horse and rider for deeper patterns that exist. Instead of, why won't my horse load? What might come through is that the horse feels unheard or that the rider has anxiety that's creating tension in the partnership, or the horse might need more or less direction in certain situations. The information that surfaces is often unexpected. And that's not because there's any kind of guessing going on, but because they're reading the relationship as a whole rather than responding to specific questions. This approach tends to reveal the why beneath the surface behavior, and it often prompts the rider to look at their own role in the partnership. Question based communication answers what you ask. Intuitive communication shows you what you might not have thought to ask. One is more diagnostic and the other is more relational. Some practitioners do both, and neither is better. They serve different purposes. Next, let's talk about what animal communication is not. And there's a few things that we should be clear about before we go any further. First, it's not a substitute for veterinary care. If your horse is lame or showing anything at all that warrants a vet visit, then see the vet. A good communicator will be the first to tell you that. It's not magic and it cannot fix deep behavioral or training issues in a single session. What it can do is illuminate why an issue exists, and then that gives you a starting point for addressing it. It's also not a rare gift that only certain people have. Anyone can learn telepathic communication. Some people come to it more naturally, and some practitioners develop it as a primary intuitive skill, but it is learnable and not reserved for a select few. It's also not a substitute for horsemanship, training, or relationship building between you and your horse. Animal communication of any sort will give you insight. What you do with that insight is still up to you. So, why are horse owners turning to animal communication? Most of them don't have any mystical reason for it. They come for very practical reasons. Horses can't tell us in words what they're thinking or feeling. So, a communicator bridges that gap, offering the horse's actual perspective on a situation or training or even on the relationship itself. Some people will come because they're stuck at a plateau and they just can't figure out why. A communicator might reveal that the horse feels rushed or not understood, or it doesn't understand what it's being asked to do. It may be dealing with physical discomfort or something that has gone unnoticed. That kind of insight can unlock real forward movement. Others come to deepen the partnership that they have with their horse. When you understand how your horse experiences your energy, anxiety, or even your intentions, you can shift your approach. And then the horse often responds also. And some come because they already have a strong sense of what's happening with their horse, but they're second guessing themselves. A communicator can confirm what you're already picking up on, and that validation matters more than people think. So, what can this look like in practice? Here are a few examples of the kinds of shifts that happen when a rider gets fresh perspective on their horse. Tension in transitions may be resolved or even eliminated. If your horse is rushing transitions and feels tense, and you've gone through trainers and adjusted your aids and tried different bits and equipment, but nothing has worked, what an intuitive communicator might pick up on is how your horse is feeling or how it is taking on your anticipation before the transition happens. Maybe he's responding to your anxiety about whether or not he'll do it right, and that anxiety is making him brace. In that way, he's not resisting the transition, he's reacting to your energy. What changes then is your focus, and that shifts your own confidence before you keep working on his transitions. Maybe that's with a sports psychologist, or maybe it's groundwork to settle your own nervous system. Maybe it's just becoming more aware of your own breathing. The horse often improves when these things change. Sometimes there are horses that are sort of going through the motions. They're willing, but they're flat. They're not really lame or sick. They're just not engaged. What might come through is that your horse feels like he's just executing rather than being part of the conversation. He might want to say more in this conversation, to have more freedom in certain moments, and be trusted that he'll make the right call. And what shifts then when you approach the ride? If you aren't managing every single moment, you offer him more room to offer you something. And that can change his level of engagement almost immediately. When there's something off, but you just can't place it, this is one of those times when your horse is just slightly off in one direction, but the vets haven't found anything, and it's not that he's lame enough to pull him aside and give him some time off, but there's something there. What a communicator might pick up on then is something like chronic tension that ties to how you're sitting, or an old injury that the horse has that flares up in certain movements, or maybe even something subtle enough that it wouldn't even show up on a standard lameness exam. Now you have a direction. So maybe you get a second opinion, or you get a body worker, or you take a closer look at your own position. The communicator didn't solve your problem, but they did point out where there's something real that you might have overlooked. When your conversation then goes deeper than you expected. So, not every session is about training or physical issues. Some of the most meaningful work that I've done has been in situations where the horse and rider have been separated, sometimes permanently. I worked with a rider who had given her horse up under difficult circumstances. She never said outright that things had not gone well after that, but her energy did. The horse has since passed, and she was carrying a lot of guilt about how it all unfolded. What came through in that session wasn't at all what she was expecting, and certainly not what I was expecting. The horse was clear, unburdened, and almost gallant in how he explained the situation. He had a kind of presence that is hard to describe, but impossible to miss once you've encountered it. He wasn't holding anything against her, and he had no interest in her apology because, from his perspective, there was nothing to apologize for. What he communicated instead was that their time together had been a form of service, his service to her, that he had been with her through something important, even if she had not fully understood that while it was happening. She left that session without the guilt she'd been carrying for a number of years. And not because she was told everything was fine, but because she'd heard from him directly. And something else shifted too, and that is that her understanding of what the relationship with a horse can actually be. And that's deeper than we're usually taught to expect. That was the kind of session that stays with you, and I don't think I will ever forget it either. Is animal communication right for you? It's not for everyone, and that is completely fine. You're probably a good fit if you're genuinely curious about your horse's perspective, If you're willing to look at your own role in whatever's coming up and open to information that might challenge your assumptions. And if you're interested in deepening the relationship beyond just practical stuff. You might want to look elsewhere if you're hoping for a quick fix to a serious behavioral or training issue, or approaching it as a test to prove that it doesn't work, or if you're not really interested in the relationship side of things at all. And if you're somewhere in between, curious but not sure, that's a fine place to start from, too. So, how do you find a communicator that's worth your time? Word of mouth is your best filter here. If someone you trust has worked with a communicator and had a meaningful experience, that carries a lot of weight. Beyond that, you want to look for someone with a track record, clear testimonials, and a straightforward explanation of how they work. A good communicator will be honest about what they do and do not offer. There are some red flags to watch out for. Anyone that is guaranteeing specific outcomes, claiming to be the only one who can help, pushing you toward expensive packages, or dismissing veterinary care or professional training. Those are all signs to keep looking. Start small if you're not sure. Many practitioners will offer short introductory sessions, and you can use those to get a feel for whether the information resonates and whether the person's approach fits what you're looking for. Because of how this work is done, you're not limited by geography. You don't need to find someone local, which opens things up considerably. One thing worth knowing if you're looking at my own sessions specifically is that I work asynchronously. Rather than being on a live call or a video call, you'll receive your session in written form, which a lot of people find they can sit with that in a way that's actually more useful than trying to absorb everything in real time. So, if you're interested in developing your own intuitive communication with your horse, remember that this is something that anyone can learn. But here's what's realistic. You're probably not going to suddenly hear your horse's voice in your head. It develops over time and usually in much more subtle ways through feelings, impressions, images, body sensations. You'll get a sense of how your horse experiences a situation or small details about his perspective that you had not understood before. It takes practice. Some people will develop it more quickly and others will need more time. Consistency matters more than natural ability. Even just 10 minutes a day of focused attention can build this skill. A lot of people find that developing their own communication deepens the partnership in ways that even the best session done by someone else cannot fully reproduce. You become more attuned, more present, more responsive. And of course, this takes time. It doesn't happen all at once. Before I wrap up today, I want to mention that I am an animal communicator myself. My focus is on intuitive, relationship based communication, the kind that looks at the dynamic between horse and rider rather than working from a list of questions. This approach is what I find to be the most useful for the things riders are actually dealing with, and it's the work I feel most drawn to. If you're curious about what intuitive communication might show you about your partnership, I have the link in the show notes. You can check it out there, and I'd love to work with you. Animal communication has become more mainstream because for a lot of people, it works. In this very practical way, it changes how they understand their horse and their own role in the partnership. Whether you explore it through a session with a communicator or if you start developing your own connection, there's something here worth paying attention to. So I'm curious, have you worked with an animal communicator? What was your experience? Drop it in the comments. I would genuinely love to hear how it's affected your horsemanship or if it has not resonated at all. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this episode resonated, I hope you'll join me again next week as we continue riding through this season together. Until then, take good care of yourself and your horse.